the Within Orb podcast. Come get Within Orb. Hello, my name is Jenn Zahrt, and welcome to Within Orb, a production of the Celestial Arts Education Library, a podcast bringing people together around the love of astrology, books. Join me as I interview people about the astrology books that changed their life and practice. You can support the podcast at withinorb.com. Welcome to another episode of Within Orb, and we are hopping across town to meet my colleague, Gray. Gray!
Hey, excited to be here, and I believe I'm within Orb.
You are actually probably partile.
Yeah.
I would say.
I mean, I could ride my bike to where you are. So.
Right. So, Gray Crawford, how did you encounter astrology through books?
Yeah, it's a great question. And when I think about it, I think it's probably not the first book I ever read, but the book that I know I really got into was The Secret Language of Birthdays, Your Complete Personology Guide for Each Day of the Year by Gary Goldschneider and Joost Elfers. My girlfriend had a copy. I also would come across it in the bookstore. And then I got really fascinated by it to the point that I actually ended up buying myself a copy. And then I started writing everybody I know's names in the book. It's not necessarily astrology. I mean, it is because it's showing you meaning for every single particular day. And they did organize it by decans and cusps. But it did give me a right away on Pisces 3 decan, which does hold up. And the Week of Dancers and Dreamers in that book, I remember. And there was one line about my particular day that said, you're more in touch with Kairos time than Chronos time.
Let's unpack
and
that.
I would have probably been 19 when I read that. So when I read that, I had never heard of Kairos. I didn't really know that whole concept, but that just kind of opened up the whole idea of it. And that's so completely accurate about me. So, I mean, that book does have some things. It was stuff like that that made me think, oh, there might be something to this. And then once I found out about astrology and that there's actually a chart, it was like that only astrology book you ever need by Joanna Woolfolk that I think everybody in the late 90s was probably getting that book.
Yeah.
They just told you how to do everything and calculate the chart. And yeah, but about the Kairos, do you want to unpack that more?
Yeah, no, I want to unpack that a little bit. You just kind of stuck a thing in. I was going to tell you a secret, and then I was like, oh no, you just brought up Kairos time. We got to go there. But the secret is, just in case, so we have a copy of that book, but I keep it in the closet. Because I'm like, hey, there's so many other amazing actual astrology books here. That's one, you kind of got to have it in your collection, but it's a little bit of one of those Barnes and Noble gateway books,
It's definitely the Barnes and Noble gateway that I definitely read in the gateway of Barnes and Noble.
So I kind of keep it in storage here. If you got to see it, I can bring it out. But really, let's go look at the other hardcore books. Anyway, okay, so Kairos time, Chronos time.
It's very much about being in the moment versus, just how all of our clocks are set. And there's even something about people love to use the clock analogy with astrology. And I understand it. And I get, there's the Antikythera mechanism and these sort of devices. I went through a period of actually disliking the idea of calling astrology a clock just because I make that association with Chronos time. And I also think I still am not sure if it's the best analogy, to be honest. But Kairos is being in the actual moment of, you could say, the zeitgeist and sort of everything happening in terms of just a whole sense of being immersed in the moment and what's the right moment to be doing something. And we do use astrology as an entry point into helping this out and helping people kind of figure out this and navigate it. But being extremely Pisces, it's always been an issue of mine versus okay, you got to do this at a certain time and fitting into that kind of clock structure we have versus when I'm just feeling like the right time to do something is a constant navigation that I'm always having.
Wow. Yeah, that kind of organized time. But then you lose time in Kairos time, in a way. You lose Chronos time.
You lose Chronos time. You do. You can go into a whole another place.
Good. Speaking of a whole nother place, if I sent you to a desert island and you could only have 3 books with you that were about astrology and your ephemeris always. Actually, I should start asking people, which ephemeris are you bringing? Anyway, so what would be the 3 books you would take with you on this trip?
Yeah, that is such a hard question to ask me. And it definitely threw me into a whole interior, debate and going over and over stuff in my mind. Like, what would I actually want to pick? And also the way you're framing the question, because you're saying like, I'm going to an island. So at first I was just like, well, I don't want any technique book. I just want to have like some interesting theory. And it was interesting though, the more I thought about it, definitely one of the books I would want to bring is Iamblichus on the mysteries. Sort of goes with what we were just kind of talking about, partially because I've never read that book front to cover, like the whole thing. And I actually want to do that. And I've recently been realizing I need to do that right now. I originally got the book years ago when teaching some workshops on the Daimon in astrology and some of the techniques that Demetra George has now brought up more in her second book about like the curios and using the predominator. There's some of those ideas Porphyry had about how to maybe help notice what might be some astrological chart meaning related to the Daimon. And Iamblichus is very famous in that book for giving his perspective, which is sort of that it transcends, it's beyond the chart. And so originally I got the book because of that and was really kind of reading more like those sections. And more recently, I was picking it up again and reading it, and just everything that's gone on since then for me, it was just really hitting me on this whole other level. I think for me and how I'm just putting everything together with my own practice and synthesizing everything, which is going back to some of that Hellenistic material, very much so, but also how it actually plays out now. And the whole idea of theurgy, which also goes in with astrological magic and how that all kind of comes into an astrological practice nowadays. I just need to really sit with this book, and just starting to read it again, it was just giving me a lot of things were just making a lot more sense. And even there's just like a lot to in that book. I mean, and we don't know necessarily, I guess, that it actually was written by Iamblichus because it's sort of written as this master Egyptian priest prophet rather than Iamblichus, but it probably, most people think it is written by Iamblichus.
Sure. And then if you follow the rules of the theurgical project with him, then you can leave the island going up with your soul.
Exactly.
Like an elevator.
Going to participate in the eternal creation of the cosmos on that island.
And then make a bunch of more islands. Whoa. Right. Oh my God. No, I love that. Yeah. And I also think there's a kind of speed of that text in a way, like, it arrives when you need it to. So for everybody listening, if you haven't never heard of Iamblichus's On the Mysteries, like maybe now is the time for you to also look into it. And if it's not, it's not also, so it can kind of be a little bit like your own encounter was. You're going, why is this here? And then you go, oh, now I know why this is here. It itself will disclose itself when it's ready to be in your world, it seems.
Oh, definitely. And I mean, and I just went through an experience of teaching the Hellenistic techniques, Zodiacal releasing for Kepler College, which was a great experience. It was a 5-week course. So I did my best to get as much in there as possible. And
that's a lot.
There are definitely a lot of people that already had Hellenistic astrology background. Some people were new to it.
Yeah.
But it just, as people start asking questions, I could tell everybody's starting to go back to their chart and looking at what all these things mean and looking at everything as being, potentially completely predetermined. There's a lot of questions that technique makes you think about. And while I do definitely believe in fate and layers of determinism, everything being completely predetermined isn't really something that I've been able to. It's a complicated question. Iamblichus, I feel like definitely really intersects with that. And I've just gotten a lot more from teaching that course, way more into like the lot of Daimon, lot of fortune, how that intersects with the chart, and just orienting people to this more sense of like soul and deeper purpose, the own sort of transformation of the self that can experience. And then how do we actually bring that transformation of self that can actually happen into a technique like Zodiacal releasing, which can sound at times the way it's described more kind of black and white, just delineating certain things like this is going to be good, this is going to be bad, where there's actually a lot of complexity going on with what that technique opens up. And so with Iamblichus, there is a thing there about, especially even with astrological magic, even, I just really like the connection into this sort of like cosmic creation, and that it's also more participatory. It's very relational. It's not about trying to force spirits or deities to do something you want. It's more, kind of that relational type of thing, which is what I'm into. Yeah.
And in this new island, you'd have a lot of new relationships to forge with the beings who would be living there.
Be a pretty busy place, I think.
Yeah. You'd turn it into a party. Okay. So what would your second book be?
Yeah. So the second book I wanted to bring up, partially just because I feel like this author is often maligned in these times of astrology, is The Astrology of Transformation by Dane Rudhyar. I have always liked Rudhyar. It could be the fact that Rudhyar and I have almost the exact same Venus, Mercury, contra Anticia to the degree. Our Venus and Aries are pretty much the same degree. Wow. I think his Mercury in Pisces is 4, and my Mercury in Pisces is more like 3. I'm a little closer to Fomalhaut than he is. But we've got an overlap there, and he's always just really spoken to me, and I actually love his writing. I love a lot of the thought he has. And The Astrology of Transformation is a book that came out towards the end of his life. It's been an interesting thing to me. Something I've thought a lot about is I get the way people are like, making fun of people that talk about transformation in astrology. But it's kind of I've been thinking, like, especially the way social media works and this like false reality and kind of like echo chamber, and like, it's kind of interesting that people don't want you to talk about how you can transform yourself with astrology. And that's supposed to be like a thing. Oh, don't write about transformation. Because if we're going to do magic, what are you trying to do? This is something I've talked with my partner, Jeannie, a lot about. Makes astrological talismans. And our home definitely has some theurgic things just going on with it. So probably that's why I need to read Iamblichus, right?
Right. But Jeannie literally transforms metal into a new shape. I mean, you can't do that kind of talisman work without transforming something. So why would the human soul not be also?
Right. Where are we doing magic? Is to transform the self. It's to transform reality. Do you like the reality we're in right now? I mean, do you want to transform the way things are right now? So why not read The Astrology of Transformation by Dane Rudhyar? I remember Robert Hand talking about in a lecture that if you read Rudhyar, it's essentially like you're reading Plotinus. Now, Iamblichus is probably not Plotinus' student. He's maybe a couple down. Some people think he was Porphyry's student who was Plotinus' student, but Iamblichus is actually connected. And I don't actually think Rudhyar and Iamblichus are completely dissimilar, to be honest. I mean, obviously, these are all the astrologers who grew up through the world wars, but there is a lot about taking into account sort of the spirit of the times and these cultural influences that we need to sort of purify ourselves from and come into this deeper sense of soul. And it doesn't mean being like an individual and disconnecting yourself from other people and the culture, even like your ancestors. But there's a way of, just the way the world is now that can be really problematic. And Rudhyar is always like very addressing that. I was just looking at it again, and there's a quote towards the end. He says, if there's a step beyond individuality, if fulfillment of individual selfhood is not accepted as an end in itself, but rather as an illusory goal that must be deliberately discarded, then the dynamic intensity of the process of transformation increases. The birth chart is now seen as an altar on which the fire of constant overcoming must burn. And then he kind of talks about how the astrologer's watching that fire. But I actually love the idea of the birth chart being an altar on which the fire is just burning. I mean, that's the kind of thing to me with Rudhyar. It's just like, and also in the book when he's talking about Mercury, it's like your Mercury is like a calm lake reflecting the stars. I mean, it's like a goal.
I was like, wait a minute, I don't know if my Mercury's doing that yet.
Yeah.
I love that though.
That's where Mercury might be able to go through the Rudhyarian perspective.
Yeah, the Rudhyarian theurgy, if you will. Yeah,
there is. There's something theurgic about him. And he's got stuff in there about secondary progressions, which I like too, because I like using secondary progressions. He talks about when they're coming to the natal points, it's more about that seed of the natal chart, and you're kind of working that out. But then when you're looking at progress to progress combinations, if you're involved in that sort of transformational process, that progress to progress is really this new thing being created. It's something that has really stuck with me, even though I haven't read Rudhyar recently. So I was like, I want to actually just read that whole book if I'm on the island. Because I've also never read that book cover to cover. I've kind of jumped around a lot in it. Yeah.
That's awesome, though. Yeah, that is a beautiful image to share the chart as an altar. I love that because then you can think of, that other ancient technique where they had that board and then you would cast the gemstones on the board, or
Oh,
you
I
would,
know.
represent the planets as little gemstones on this board. That's like, whoa, like.
I think all of us are preparing to have that board. We just need somebody that can really produce that board. A lot of us have the stones that are ready to be
Yeah.
placed on that board to mark things out.
Sure. Or we have, a house full of various altars, I mean, it's like my sun altar here and the Venus is over here and like, and then you do your locational chart and you've got these spokes going everywhere and,
Yeah.
Anyway.
I want to welcome everyone to the Significant Sources Salon.
We are honored to have Dr. James Dotson host our Significant Sources Salon, guiding you through the books that have been most impactful in the world of astrology.
We have curated several books which I think will be interesting, books that you might not have picked up yourself because they perhaps seem old or daunting, and we will make them accessible to you.
The salon meets for 90 minutes every month with a summer break.
For more details, go to www.CAELi.institute.
Join today, and we will see you there. Okay, so book number 3.
Yeah, this is the one that really, I figured out, I was like, well, I want to go with those two just because I'd like to read those. And then it was hard because I thought, well, Cosmos and Psyche by Richard Tarnas, which I'm sure many people have referenced on your show, was a big influence on me that really helped me understand those cycles. William Lilly Christian Astrology would be fun on an island just to sit, really pour over all his like chart work would be kind of interesting because I haven't really done that to the extent that I should. I would love to actually get more into Abu Mashar's on the revolutions. I haven't been able to make the space for it. So I was thinking about that too. And I was starting to think about that, but I actually have to go with Vidius Valens, the anthology, mostly because of it's got a lot of stuff in there. And because teaching that Zodiacal releasing course for Kepler College has just really opened up my awareness of it. And I've actually been getting some ideas really recently that could become like this much bigger thing, whether it's a book or just a bunch of talks and stuff. It's sort of going into illustrating out all the different combinational structures that are there.
You mean in the Zodiacal releasing setup?
Yeah. When I did a Time Lord retreat with Demetra, she talked about there being these archetypal timing structures, which I was like, yeah, that's true. Each one, it is an archetypal timing structure, and they're all based on the planetary nature because they're all planetary periods, right? But there's a sequence that they all have, and we all have them, and we all hit them at the same time.
That's my favorite part about learning a Zodiacal releasing, is when you get to that stage of seeing those 12 archetypes.
Yeah, and really having to teach it was what really, I mean, I think that often happens once you actually teach a course. You have to really get even further into understanding like fundamental aspects of it. There's something about that even for each sign. I feel like it's revealing.
Yeah, I ended up making a design. So I started just drawing them out because I realized you could memorize them. So like the Mars periods are 15 units and the Venus periods are 8 units. So I ended up using graph paper and just sketching out like what each potential, like, all 4 levels would be. And I couldn't get enough space on it. So I ended up designing this research tool that you know about in the nataltransits.com/timelord.html. But the next step was I made scarves. I like designed fashion because I was like, you could just put a pin on wherever your current releasing period is and like wear this scarf and just be like, oh yeah, look, I'm about to loosen the bond.
That's pretty awesome. No, that's totally something that could be. You could have all 12 scarves, and so you could even layer them. Like you have the level 1 scarf that you know, then you've got the level 2 and level 3.
Oh, you just took it to the next level. I just did level 1 and 2 on the same scarf, so it looks a little bit like a piano.
Okay.
Yeah, but I mean, anybody could design it any which way they want,
Yeah, I think it'd be cool to have 12 that each one is the sequence.
Yeah.
Then you could like layer them.
Oh my gosh.
And you could maybe. Then you were doing a theurgic ritual with your Zodiacal releasing, wearing the 4 scarves.
Genius. And then, you could just pick like Aries L1 and then Aries L2, and it's like mini. It's like shorter. And you'd have to like get a bunch and cut them up and like put them all together, Anyway. So yeah, but Valens, I mean, he's the only one who talks about zodiacal releasing, and that's in book 4 of that book.
Yeah, and then just even all his work on the lots and the different ways. There are a lot of chart examples, and before teaching the course, I did a free webinar for Kepler College on a lot of Daimon and Fortune, partially actually to get that, try to have that be not something I'd have to teach in the course to create more space for myself.
Yeah.
And I started going a lot more through the examples for that, but it made me realize there's just way more of looking through that book and the examples. Yeah, so that would be a good one to have on the island for sure.
Awesome. Okay. Well, and then, you leave the island with a 4th book, which would be your commentary on Valens.
Yeah, the altar on the altar of Zodiacal releasing. I gotta think of the title, but it's gonna bring in there's
altars.
The altar.
I like the AZ combo.
The altar, the fire burning on the altar of Zodiacal releasing.
Yeah, astrology from A to Z, altars to Zodiacal releasing. Oh my gosh. I mean, it depends on how long you're there. I think your consciousness would probably theurgically ascend a lot quicker than most because you have some ground game with that. But nevertheless, okay, so if someone was just getting into astrology, where would you point them? Which books would you give to the student?
Yeah, another really great question. And I was just realizing, I have 2 daughters. My older daughter, Vivica, she knows astrology. I think she'll definitely probably become a practicing astrologer. She also is graduated university, probably will go to school to become a counselor and probably have the combination. And it occurs to me, I haven't actually read these books myself, but what books did I actually buy my daughter? And 2 of the ones that I had looked around to be like, okay, what would be really good to get her were Carol Taylor's book, Astrology Using the Wisdom of the Stars in Your Everyday Life, and also Sue Tompkins' book on aspects. Actually, before coming on here, I texted her to be like, I bought you that Sue Tompkins book, right? And she's like, oh yeah, I love it. I look at it all the time.
Oh, wow.
When I looked around for Carol Taylor, I was like, oh, this looks pretty good. Like it has kind of everything in one book. Like it's way better than the only astrology book you'll ever need version of that. But one book that I would definitely recommend is Soul Symbol and Imagination by Brian Clark. So that is not going to go into a lot of astrological techniques, but I really love that book. And I like drawing attention to Brian's work because I think Brian Clark's a really important voice in astrology that in America doesn't always seem to get all the attention for some reason. I'm not actually sure why. One of the things I like about that book, because it can be very technique heavy, like Dane Rudhyar, I think he's a very beautiful writer. He's actually interesting to read. There's a poetic, symbolic quality. And reading him, you sort of get this whole sense of how he works imaginally. And he makes points in there about, if you've just memorized a bunch of definitions and keywords, and of course we all have to do that in astrology, but that's what early students are typically doing. And he talks about how, if it's a living symbol, this is also my own paraphrase version of this, but if you're working with this living symbol, there is this relational capacity that's needed there. It's no longer an act of divination if you're just being like, this means this, this means this, this means this. How do you actually encounter that symbol? And he describes his own experience of giving consultations in the book and, working with somebody and what they're saying and kind of describing his own inner feeling of what has come up in him. And, they don't know that I actually know about this transit because we have that experience. So he's actually sort of describing even some of those consulting experiences. And it's a nice sort of overview of a lot of astrological concepts that I think is actually a very helpful book, especially for people that are, I understand why, that people want to get really into all the really heavy technique, traditional older books that actually don't give you any ability to know how to actually talk to somebody though and relate to the symbol and what's going on in the consultation. So I think that's a really good one by Brian Clark.
Cool. Yeah. I mean, that's a whole other facet of documenting what this practice is, right? Because it's not just this, you can see the future. It's more like, how can you break the news humanely?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Another one would be Classical Seven Planets by Charles Aubert, I'm not sure how to say his last name. Just because, he's just got all 7 planets. There's all this stuff all there. Like he has Valens and Lilly and Abu Mashar. It's all in one book. It's just collated together. So if people don't have that one, I really recommend it just because it kind of gives you a bunch of older authors. Like you flip page to page and they're all there. So it makes it easier just to kind of see it all and take it in. And
very cool. Any others?
Predictive Astrology by Bernadette Brady. I think a lot of people probably recommend that one, but I do think that one's really good. I found that one a little bit later, and I think that would have been a really helpful book for me when I was younger to get, because she gets into like even stuff like secondary progressions and eclipses and like a Venus return or a Mars return. I mean, there's a bunch of stuff that's all thrown into that book that are all really helpful things that you want to eventually get into learning how to do, and it's all there basically.
Yeah, it is. And I love looking at the eclipse work in that book, like the way that she talks about eclipse families for delineating like what's going to happen the coming eclipse.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like she's the person that really brought back working with that Saros cycle, and so that is all in that book, and it's still interesting to look at. And you can look back at the origin eclipse if you want and see her like little midpoint theory of what she's basing stuff off on in that origin eclipse. Yeah. No, it's really, really a neat approach there. Yeah, and a couple others. Joy Usher's Tiny Universe, I think is really good also if you are somebody that's wanting to learn traditional astrology and integrate a lot of this stuff. I think she has some nice language, especially in terms of like the signs, I feel like, and being like water signs and fire signs. And another one sort of in the same vein, that same sort of deal would be Dorian Greenbaum's book on temperament, Astrology's Forgotten Key. I think that's a really good book on temperament. And I feel like Joy Usher in her book, when you're reading through it, she writes stuff out and has examples. And I just feel like it's helpful to get a better picture in your mind of how some of these things come into play with how do you like synthesize something together into actually meaning something versus that you're just like have all these different things you maybe memorize or being told this is what it's supposed to mean and that kind of thing.
Yeah. That's a really awesome point with her work too. So yeah, that's a fantastic list of books for people. Speaking of people, where can people find you?
Yeah, my website is graycrawford.net, so you can always look for me there. I typically am writing something about the new moons or the full moons. That's pretty much it at this point. Sometimes some other articles. I have a Patreon that you can join. There's a monthly meeting there where we just get together and talk about what's happening. And there's another higher level where sometimes my partner Jeannie's doing them with me, and otherwise it's just me doing a monthly class on a different fixed star each month. And we go through like as many different cultural mythologies as we can and looking at some of the older texts and what they say about it. Then also getting into if there is any magical tradition, citing that, and also just other ideas and practices you can do if you want to have some kind of ritual relationship with the star. And then we also will talk about Paran and projected degree examples usually too, just within the same class.
Ooh, both at the same time.
Sometimes if there is one, but at least like an example of people that have the Paran and then also examples of projected degree.
Oh, wow.
And sometimes it'll be happening with the same person that they'll have both going on at once.
Well, if you get to the Southern Cross, let me know because I have a fantastic example of a projected degree. Anyway, so that's so awesome what you're up to. And thank you for taking time to share your book mind with me and the listeners. And yeah, we'll see you at CAELi.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for listening to Within Orb. To learn more about the Celestial Arts Education Library or to become a member, visit our website at caeli.institute. That's www.caeli.institute. If you enjoyed this episode, please help spread the word. Follow or subscribe to Within Orb in your podcatcher of choice, rate it 5 stars, or write us a happy review. This helps others find the show. We also want to give a big thanks to the indie band The E-Block for contributing their song Wake Up for our intro and outro music. You can find them at their website, eblockband.com. This is Jenn Zahrt, signing off for now. See you next time.